we. So, so there's a lot of reasons why one would still want to sort of pay attention to the agenda. And the other thing is that you also need to handle or to deal with some of the things that they are putting into the mix. One of the things that's going on is a huge war, a spiritual war on the planet, and one needs to be aware that certain things, like, let's say, the Gulf situation with the Gulf oil situation, which was, from what I understand, there was a nuke placed under sea there, and that there is a volcano, and that there is a rising of land, and so on going on there. That was also meant to trigger a destabilization of the New Madrid Fault, which is one of their targeted areas to attack at some future juncture, and may actually go partially as a natural occurrence as part of the earth changes that we're going to be a part of. But in order to, in essence, deal with the situation here on earth and possibly even alleviate some of the pressure, it's better that you also pay attention to this reality and what's going on around you, rather than just simply concentrate on so-called raising your frequency. Becoming aware is the process of raising your frequency, so it's going to happen, regardless.
Okay. When you talk about the fourth and fifth dimension, which we've had David on and he talked about this as well, are you talking about like a physical thing or a spiritual thing? Is it that when we die we go over to the fifth, fourth, or fifth, or is it as we're here in the physical form?
No, it's as we're here in the physical form, but our form itself is changing, and there will be evidence out there that you may have seen, even scientific verification in articles and mainstream science, talking about how the sun is actually sending energy toward the Earth at this time that is changing our very DNA. This is it manifests physically, but what you're calling physically is changing, and this dimension we call 3D, what has been 3D Earth, is changing and to encompass the 4D reality, which in the process, what happens is, as I said, the material reality becomes more malleable. That means that the molecules are, if you want to use the word molecules, in other words, it involves the idea that you can actually transmute yourself transport yourself from one place to another, transmute things from one form to another. It has to do with the ability to put your hand through a wall, for example. If you start to understand how those molecules, in order to change reality and become more like a fourth dimension, more space enters into the quotient. And that's what it's all about. In other words, light coming in through the cracks, if you will, between the molecules, and allowing us to basically move through this thing we call sort of present reality easier. And it's something that ETs have been able to do, obviously, for eons. It's only something that human beings are starting to realize they're capable of. And as you do, you change your material reality. So it's literally something where it's transmuting from one thing to another. And since I'm not a scientist, it's hard for me to use the language that perhaps some scientists would use, but I think you maybe get my drift.
I do. I think we had David talking about that on the show, which is very interesting as well. Do you want to?
Just when something Kerry said there, just kind of a little light bulb. You've probably seen the little light bulb going off above my head.
Seen the light bulb?
A little 60-watt light bulb.
Yeah.
But no, do you remember we were watching that documentary on the chemtrails?
Yeah.
And they're saying that they're spraying aluminium in the sky, and we both know aluminium is a good conductor, and it's also a good reflector.
Yeah.
And if the sun is sending down this energy that is starting to change people's DNA, I'm just wondering if the sky is getting coated with this aluminium, would that kind of serve two purposes? One, to kind of poison the crops and let them introduce this GMO seed.
Eugenics, yeah.
Yeah. And would it also serve to this energy that's getting reflected down, that is possibly changing DNA, to maybe reflect that back away from the earth, so as not to wake up the people, or not to change the DNA?
Interesting theory.
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
going back to sleep now.
I think that that's a good place to go. There is a shield being erected around the Earth. It is interfering with the rays of the sun. I mean, there is a very dark side here on Earth that does not want this transition of humanity to go from the third through the fourth and into the fifth dimension. And so they are trying to prevent it. And yes, it's very possible the chemtrails are part of that. In other words, also to dumb down your or dampen your immune system so that you basically get sick and aren't able to become the truly amazing superhuman being that you are capable of being. So yes, I would say that that's true. There's also things going on with the chemtrails and with putting probably barium and aluminum into the skies. From my understanding, that has to do with them also becoming more able to track and even prevent the entry of various UFOs and vehicles from off-world here at this time. In other words, they're able to, they're putting a shield up there so that those vehicles will not be able to penetrate this airspace as easily. And if they do, they light up, so to speak, on the radar and other more sophisticated machinery that they use.
If these people are so afraid of something like that happening, I mean, surely if they were to share it with the rest of us, even in bits and pieces, if they shared this information, maybe mere mortals like us could be able to help and
Yeah, but
do something.
They will do. Remember what I said about the difference between harmony and disharmony. The New World Order, their plan of attack psychologically will be, and I know I've said this to you before, Steve. You get families. They say the statistics say that 80% of families are dysfunctional, right?
Yeah.
And you get infighting between families. But when something threatens the family from outside, the family get together.
The family unit,
right?
Yeah.
So if you think of the movie Independence Day, they had all these different countries, and all of a sudden something from outside the planet was threatening the planet, and all of a sudden we're human, and we're not like English or Irish or whatever. So I think personally, I don't know whether Kerry would vouch for this or agree with me on this, but I think what the New World Order will do is this disclosure project is going to happen, and whether they will be real or whether they'll be kind of special effects, that they'll be illusions or having UFOs in the sky, and they say, well, we don't know whether they're friendly or not, so we all have to get together for this global New World Order and these people to fight these aliens. Now I don't know, do you know where I'm coming from with that, Kerry?
Yeah, what you're talking about is what's called Project Bluebeam, and there's a lot of talk about it. There is evidence from many, many whistleblowers that they do plan to have something of that nature occur. Although what's happened since then is that Camelot and other organizations have, like Alex Jones, et cetera, have also made a lot of people aware of those plans. And there is a big problem with what we call Project Bluebeam, which is if you decide to have a fake alien invasion on the planet, the trouble is there are real aliens, and they might have a problem with that. And especially if they don't like the way you're conducting your operation, they may try to interfere, and you can't stop them. And so that suddenly you've got a disclosure that you didn't sort of bargain on. And so this is where it becomes very inflammable, if you will. If they try something, there are always positive ETs, interdimensionals, etc., and negative ones on both sides of the sort of spectrum, who are watching what's going on here on planet Earth with great interest, some of which is self-interest. In other words, a species self-interest, and some of which is a caring, hands-off, but sort of making sure that we stay the course, so to kind of interest. And so you've got multiple, let's say, power games being played between these various interest groups. And when I say interest groups, you again have to involve the various ET races that are involved. So the game is quite complex, and I have to say that yes, they want to do something of that nature. There is an effort to waken people up. Now, that doesn't mean that all ETs are positive. I mean, this is the trouble with Stephen Greer's stuff and some other stuff out there, which will dumb down people to the place where they become victims and then of a takeover. Just as bad to be taken over by a bunch of negative ETs as to be taken over by the Illuminati and run by their New World Order. In fact, I would encourage people who haven't done so to read Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, someone who was an insider who, according to Richard Hoagland and Henry Deacon, one of our best whistleblowers, and other people, was very clued in to what the New World Order and what the powers that be in the military complex had in mind for the planet. And he was a brilliant writer, and he died fairly recently. We wanted to interview him because we felt at this juncture he was close enough to the end of his life where he would really maybe spill the beans. Unfortunately, he died right before we were able to go over there to Sri Lanka and interview him. But that doesn't change the fact that he had superb information about what's really going on here on the planet. He writes a very cautionary tale about things like, if you will, AI and as well as the ET quotient and so on and so forth. And again, Childhood's End is a good place to start with his work. So that is also about, in other words, you know, the TV show V, if you've been watching it on the series that was, I believe, just canceled, which, you know, these people drive me crazy. They cancel some of the best series, obviously, always. However, but V is a perfect indicator of that. In other words, the most likely takeover scenario you have out there is a group of ETs that come and act like they are, you know, very benevolent and they have your best interests in mind and they're extremely nice and et cetera, et cetera. And in reality, they're basically power hungry reptilians.
Just kind of following on from that, Kerry, just that statement there. A question from Anne. Anne is wondering, have you had any personal revelations in regard to the underlying ET/NWO agenda that you haven't yet shared with the world?
Can you give us an exclusive then, is what you're saying?
That's what Anne's asking. I'm only the messenger.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I have some ideas about the future. In other words, I've had dreams of the future, and I haven't really talked about them all that much. But you know, the trouble with sort of talking about sort of precog visions and so on and so forth, in my view, and why I haven't made a big deal of this in the past, is that I don't want to influence circumstances and influence people so that those things necessarily happen. In other words, I think that there's a responsibility that goes along with communicating this information. Now, some of the information is already out there, and some of the information is incoming. At this time, I do have new information that has come to me, which makes perfect logical sense to me. It isn't out there in the general public. I have been leaking it out there in bits and pieces, and I did so in Glastonbury in my talk. The one thing I can say, I guess, here on the show for your listeners is that I have a fairly recent whistleblower piece of information that has to do with how our governments, our secret government, is interacting with the fourth dimension. And it is well known that the fourth dimension is, in essence, the home of many, many ET races. And this has been verified. And among those, obviously, are the Greys and reptilians. And this is why you don't see them in your everyday reality. That is, you know, at least on the surface, very, very what we call 3D. It's as you become, you know, as your sight opens up and as your consciousness opens up, you have more interactions with these beings who come from the fourth dimension.
Okay, we have a question for you regarding Bob Dane and Planet X and Nirabu. Can you give us some information on that?
Sure. I mean, there are some very conflicting pieces of information out there in regard to not only Planet X, or so-called Elinen, which is, from my understanding, is not Planet X. Elinen is a comet or asteroid-like, rock-like, very, very large rock. I've actually seen it, and